Hi, I'm Bruce Bonebrake. The single most important safety system for your vehicle is the brakes. Losing the ability to stop or slow down almost always results in a collision. So proper care and maintenance is vital to ensure that your brakes are always there when you need them. On this installment of the AutoZone video series, we'll show you how a typical brake system works, ways to care for your car's brakes so they'll last as long as possible, and how to diagnose the most common problems. We're also going to perform a complete system service so you can see what to do when your brakes need repair. Drum-style brakes are older technology that's been used for many decades, while disc brakes started becoming commonplace in the 70s. Newer vehicles will have a combination of the two, with disc brakes on the front and drum brakes on the rear wheels, or they'll have disc brakes on all four wheels. The brake systems used on your grandparents' vehicles have changed a lot through the years, and that's due to modern technology. But in principle, they work exactly the same. Friction. Friction is created when two surfaces contact each other. That's a brake system. A good example of that is on this bicycle. This is a real simple system. We have a hand-operated cable system. The cable goes down to a caliper. The caliper is applied and pushes the brake pad to the wheel. Let me show you. As I rotate the wheel, I apply pressure on the handle, and you can see it stops the wheel. The more pressure I apply, the faster it's going to stop. This is basically how a brake system works. That contact point between the pad and the wheel is where our friction is created. Now, the most common system used today is a disc brake system. Here's a working example of what that system looks like. Let's just start with some of the parts to this. First off, let's start with our rotor. The rotor is the flat plate that's connected to the wheel. As the rotor spins, you'll see inside of here we have two pads. There's one on the outboard, and we have the inboard pad. This is the caliper that holds the pads in place. How this works is real simple. Your foot is connected to the master cylinder. That's this part here. It contains the brake fluid. As you press your foot down on the brake pedal, there's a rod inside the master cylinder, takes fluid out of the reservoir, forces it through this hose into the caliper. When that fluid's in the caliper, there's a piston inside there. That fluid's on the back side of the piston. It'll apply the piston to the inboard pad. When that happens, the caliper is a sliding type of caliper. It'll slide this way and apply the outboard pad. This is actually a working simulator of how a disc brake system works. Let me show you. Okay, we turn it on. Now the way this works, the lever is the same as the brake pedal on your vehicle. As I press the lever, you're going to watch the rotor. You're going to see that it slowly comes to a stop. Now the more effort I give it, the faster it's going to stop. Now how this works is simple. You can really see it now with this operating. If you look inside the caliper, we have the inboard and we have the outboard disc pads. As I apply pressure, you'll see the caliper actually applying the disc pads. When I release, they release. Now the disc pads are one part that's going to just normally wear out. Here's an example of that right here. Now this set of disc pads, these have been replaced, and if you look at these, there's like for one wheel, there's the two for the other wheel. We even have the wear tab that's mounted on the inboard pad. Now these disc pads, if you look at these, they're all worn out about the same. We're about maybe 1/4 of the thickness left from when they were new. So they were changed right in time. Now here's another example. These are a lot larger brake. This was off of a medium or heavy duty truck, more than likely a 1-ton vehicle. Now these have been replaced as well. This is the outboard shoe. This is the inboard shoe. Now if you look at them, there's a drastic difference here in the amount of friction material that's left. The outboard shoe, there's almost no friction material left. And on the inboard shoe, we still have quite a bit of friction material. Well, this is one side. Let's look at the other side. The other side of the same vehicle, because you buy the pads, is set for both wheels, which would be 4 disc pads. If you look at the outboard pad, we're almost metal to metal. If you look at the inboard pad, we are metal to metal. So this tells me that not only are the brakes worn out, there's a reason that the disc pads wore out unevenly. This might have had a bad caliper. It might have had a bad brake hose. There was something that was causing this brake to drag. So there'd be more components needed to be replaced. These are the old brake pads. Now if you look at this, here's a set of brand new disc pads, and you'll see the amount of pad material that was originally on the pads. Now you compare that to this one over here, you'll see that there's quite a bit of difference in the pad material. Well, it's normal for the friction material to wear out. This is the part of the brake that's normally is going to wear out, and eventually is going to need to be replaced. And that's what we're here to do today, to go ahead and replace the brakes. Let's get started. Today we'll be working on a 2001 Dodge Caravan, a very common vehicle. Its brake system is a four-wheel disc system. The time needed to service a brake system will vary depending on the vehicle, but in general, it'll just take a few hours. Always consult a service manual for specific details and instructions that apply to your make and model. Something to keep in mind is that the vehicle's front brakes do most of the stopping. On some cars, the rear brakes will do 40% of the work, while on others, they'll do as little as 20%. For that reason, you'll find the front brakes almost always wear out faster than the rear. However, you should always inspect the rear brakes whenever you replace the front brakes. As with any job, to do it right, you'll need the right tools. The nice thing is, the jobs we'll be covering today don't require a large, expensive assortment. Basic hand tools are generally all you'll need. In case where a specialty tool is required, be sure to check with AutoZone's Loan a Tool program. They have many specialty tools that can help you complete your job a lot quicker and easier. The first things you'll need are a socket set, brake line wrench, drop light, and a repair manual for your specific vehicle. You may also need screwdrivers or pliers to remove some components. A torque wrench is necessary for tightening nuts and bolts to the correct specifications. To get under the vehicle, you'll need a good jack, some wheel blocks, and some sturdy jack stands. Finally, a good supply of oil dry, an assortment of rags, and a quality hand cleaner are must-have items for easy cleanup after the job is finished.
Get in the zone, AutoZone.
When lifting a vehicle, never work under it until it has been secured with wheel blocks and securely positioned on jack stands. A hydraulic jack alone is never enough. Be cautious when working with oils and chemicals. Many are damaging to the groundwater environment and toxic to people and animals. Never drain or pour chemicals into the ground or sewer systems. Local municipalities and counties offer resources for proper disposal. And always remember to wear your safety glasses.
Before we actually take anything apart, this is a good time to do a good visual inspection of the brake system. A couple things I'm looking for here. For one, to make sure that the brake's free. Well, right now the transmission's in gear, so I can't turn it a complete revolution, but I can tell that it's free. Something else to look at too is you want to take a good look at the brake hoses. You're going to look to make sure there's no cracks in the hoses. Okay, they look good too. It looks fine. You want to check all the caliper hardware, make sure everything's in place, make sure the caliper is not real loose. Everything looks good. The problem with this van is it has a brake noise. Whenever the brake is applied, there's a noise. At one time or the other, I can tell by looking at the rotor that the disc pads have been replaced, but the rotor wasn't resurfaced. And the bad thing about that is it almost causes like a record effect, and it'll cause the noise. Let's go ahead and take the caliper off, take a good look at the disc pads and see what condition they're in. This is an anti-rattle clip. It stops the caliper from rattling on its mount. You want to pay close attention to how it's positioned here, because when you put it back in place, you're going to need to know where it goes. This just snaps out of its hole. There it goes. Right there. Okay, there's our caliper. Here's our disc pads. I really want to take a good look at the disc pads to see the condition that they're in. They still have a lot of the friction material still left on it, but as you can see, they're actually flaking on the edges. And that again is because the rotors weren't surfaced when these were installed. Even though the pads still have life remaining on it, they're basically destroyed. In order to get rid of the noise, we'll have to replace the pads, and we're also going to have to replace these rotors. And you can see we have quite a bit of distance before we get to our wear indicator, before it starts making a noise. And that's another thing too. This is making a noise because the rotor wasn't surfaced the last time. Something else that'll cause a noise too is that this is a wear indicator is what this is. This little tab. Whenever this little tab comes into contact, because the friction material wears down to that point, it alerts the driver that it's time to replace the disc pads, and it does that before this is actually it contacts to be metal to metal. What it'll do is it'll make a noise, and as soon as you hit the brake, the noise will stop. You let off the brake, you'll hear the noise again. You'll notice it mostly at low speeds. If you hear a real harsh grinding sound, it's too late. You've already went metal to metal with it, and chances are you're going to need to replace the disc pads and the rotors. The next thing I need to do now is go and take the caliper bracket off. Then I'm going to take the rotor off. Okay, we've got the caliper bracket off, and one thing we want to look for in a caliper bracket is make sure we don't have excessive wear where the disc pad, you can see where it's been contacting the bracket. You want to check, make sure it's not grooved. If it was, you'd have to replace this bracket. It looks good. It's a little dirty and hasn't had grease in a while, but we'll take care of that when we put it back together. The next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and take the rotor off. Before I do that, though, I've got the caliper just sitting on top of the rotor. I don't want the caliper to be hanging by the hose. If I do, it'll actually damage the inside of the hose. This is a good time just to take just a regular piece of wire. We can attach it to our spring on our coils, our strut here, and we'll just go ahead and hang it up, get it out of our way. We'll be working on it later, but for right now, that'll get it out of the way for us. There we are. Now I'm going to take the rotor off, take a good look at it. It's not grooved too bad on the inside, but on the outside it definitely is. Now here's where you need to make a decision. There's two ways to take care of this. One way is we can resurface the rotor. What you basically do is you turn it down on a lathe and resurface it. And the way that you determine whether or not it's able to be resurfaced is the thickness of the rotor. You'd actually measure the thickness. But I'll tell you what, they've almost got to the point now that the price of the replacement rotor is not that much more than the service that it costs to turn it. I know the people that own this vehicle are going to keep it for quite a while. The only thing is, if we resurface this now and then down the road it would need to be resurfaced again, we'd have to throw them away and go ahead and replace the rotors. We're just going to go ahead and replace the rotors now, put the new disc pads on it. We should be good to go. On the caliper, what we need to do to it, let's go ahead and unhook it now. Just leave our hanger handy because we might be putting it right back up on there. Now if you look at this, there's the piston that actually applies against the inboard pad. Before we can put the new pads on here and the new rotors, we need to push the piston back into its bore, and there's a trick about that. Let me get a couple of tools ready and we'll go ahead and push the piston back in. Okay, back at our caliper, what we want to do, we need to push the piston back in. In order to do that, there's one thing to keep in mind. Right here at this friction point where the inboard pad and the outboard pad meet the rotor, that's where the excessive heat is. After a period of time, that heat's going to transfer from the piston into the caliper bore, and this fluid's been in there for a long time. You don't want to push the piston back in, allow that fluid to go back up through the hose, back up into the brake system. This is really important on ABS, analog brake system, because they have such small orifices in a lot of the components. What we want to do, when we push the piston back in, we want to expel the old fluid right from the bleeder screw. Now to do that, it's real simple. What we'll do, we use a C-clamp. Let's go ahead and open it up. Put the threaded end. I can go right into the hole of the caliper piston. and get it set. You don't want to tighten it right now. We just want to get it set into place. Just a little bit of pressure, just like that. Now, it's to the point, I'll go ahead and open up the bleeder screw. You don't want to open the bleeder screw until the C-clamp's in place, or you could have air enter into the system. Okay, with it open, we're already losing fluid. You want to have a pan to capture it in. And as I compress the piston, you'll even see the color of the fluid is kind of a brownish tint to it. Continue pushing the piston back in. Now all that fluid would have been forced up into the system. Okay, we get to the very bottom like that. You don't want to over tighten it. Just hold it like that and go ahead and tighten your bleeder back up. Put the seal back on, the bleeder seal, and we can take our C-clamp off. The next service we want to do to the caliper and also the mounting hub and the bracketry, we're going to take some brake cleaner, spray everything down real well, get it all cleaned up, and we'll be ready to put our new parts on. This side's basically ready for the new rotor and the new disc pads. But before we do that though, let's take the other side apart and take a good look at it. Because you want to replace these in pairs. We're automatically going to replace both rotors because we're replacing this one. You automatically replace both disc pads on both sides, all 4 disc pads. But if we have a caliper on the other side that's defective, we'll have to replace that caliper and this one because you have to replace them in pairs. Let's go ahead and get everything ready and take the other side apart. Well, it looks like this side is exactly the same as the other side. Our rotor's free, so it tells us our caliper isn't binding. We have the same groove problem with the rotor, so this rotor needs to be replaced. The brake hose looks good, the caliper is secure. One thing I want to mention though while we're here is the rotor. A lot of different vehicles will have different designs, different ways of attaching the rotor to the vehicle, and ours is just a slip fit. Some cases, when this really rusts up, you may have to tap the back side of the rotor to release it. And if you do that, you want to use like a plastic tip or a rubber hammer so you don't damage the surface if you're planning on reusing the rotor. The information on this can be found in your repair manual. You have the repair manual for your application. It'll also have useful information there like the torque specifications for all of our fasteners, the torque specifications for our wheel and tire. What we need to do next is go ahead and take this side apart, clean it all up, and then we start putting the new parts on. Before we start assembling this, we want to take another good look at our caliper. There's a couple things I want to mention to you. First off, there's a dust seal on the outside of the caliper right here between the piston and the caliper bore. You want to check this seal to make sure it's not ruptured. If it is, you either need to rebuild the caliper or replace it because debris will be allowed to get in there and it can make that caliper hang up, make this brake lock up. The second thing is the caliper attaching hardware. In our case, we have rubber bushings on both of the guide pins. You want to take a good look at those. If they're worn, what will happen is allow the caliper to move. This could be a pop noise that you may hear every time you hit the brake. We're going to go ahead and replace our hardware on this at the same time. It's fairly inexpensive, and by the time between now and the next time we do our brakes on this, they'll probably be worn out. Let's go ahead and talk about our disc pads. Now the disc pads, they've came a long ways. There's a lot of different ways you can go with this. Now this car originally came with a semi-metallic disc pad, just like this. Now if you look at this pad, we have our wear indicator is on the pad, plus we have a shim here. This is to keep the noise down. This is basically to keep the brakes quiet. An alternate choice would be this. This is the new ceramic style disc pad. If you look at the ceramic style compared to the semi-metallic style, they look a lot alike. The biggest difference is in the compound material of the pad itself. The metals used in this pad are a softer metal, so it's quieter. It still has the shim, as the other pad does, but a couple of key advantages to the ceramic. You'll have a better braking power, they're a longer life disc pad, and they're almost zero dust. In this vehicle with it having the chrome wheels on it, that may be a concern to the owner. So we're going to go ahead and install the ceramic pads on this. Well, the next thing we need to do is go ahead and remove our old caliper hardware and install our new hardware and finish putting the rest of the new parts on. One thing you want to keep in mind also on this, you want to use the lubricant. You have to use the right type brake lubricant. This is meant for high heat, meant for the brake system. On our bushings, I want to go ahead and lubricate those before I put them back into the caliper. And there'll be several places on here that are contact points that you need to lubricate. If you're not sure, you can refer back to your service manual. It'll tell you what you need to do. I'm not blocky. It's important to lubricate all the sliding contact points because this is a sliding caliper. If you don't lubricate these areas, what will happen is the caliper won't be allowed to move. And if that happens, what will happen is you'll wear out the inboard pad, but you won't wear out the outboard pad because the caliper will be stationary. So it's real important to locate and to lubricate all of your contact points and your slide points. We also want to put some lubricant on our disc pads. This is our inboard pad and that's our outboard pad. You can tell by looking at it, there's a visible difference. You can see the retainer where this snaps into the piston on the inboard pad to keep it still. What we want to do is we want to lubricate it on the back side of the pad, on the metal part where the shim is, right where the piston is going to contact it, and then on the front pad, our caliper, we have the two ears of our caliper, so that's a contact point and that's a contact point. So the same thing, we want to apply lubricant onto the shim on both of those areas. There we are, just like that. This is just one more preventative maintenance to guard against any kind of brake noise. One other thing you want to do is you'll make sure you don't get any grease on the pad material. So it's about time I need to wash my hands before going any farther. Okay, this is our replacement rotor, and if you look at this, it's already been surfaced and balanced, and it also has been machined so it's low noise. You can see the crosshatch pattern on it. One thing you want to do though before you put this on the vehicle, there's a protective film on this, like an oil film to stop it from any surface rust while sitting on the shelf. We want to take some brake cleaner and go ahead and wash this off before we put it on the vehicle. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, next we want to install our caliper mounting bracket. Now, the bolts on a bracket that actually hold the caliper bracket to the spindle, you want to pay close attention to the threads of the bolt. If you look at the threads, you'll see this even has like a bluish tint there. That tells me that this had Loctite on the bolts when they were put in there. Something else, this is a good time to go ahead and check your manual to see what it says. Some of the bolts are even torqued to yield where they're only a one-time use. If that's the case, at the same time you replace the rotors and the disc pads, you have to replace these bolts. In our case, all we need to do is put the Loctite on there. These also have to be torqued to a certain specification, which is also in our manual. Now on the Loctite, the two common types out there, it's red and blue. Basically, it's the color of the Loctite liquid that's inside the bottle, but the red is high strength and the blue is medium strength. You want to make sure you go back with the correct type of Loctite. If you're not sure, if there's no Loctite on the bolts holding the caliper bracket on there, just go ahead and put the blue Loctite on there, just better safe than sorry. Now when you install the Loctite on the bolts, you need to be careful you don't put a whole lot on there. Just run across the threads of the bolt just like that. That'll be fine. And then we want to do the same to the other bolt. Something else too, whenever you put the Loctite on the bolts, you need to go ahead and assemble this together, because if you don't, the effectiveness of the Loctite won't be there. Let's go ahead and put this on. Okay, we've got them snugged up, and we're going to go ahead and torque them to specification. The two mounting bolts for the caliper are actually slide pins. If you look at the bolt real close, you can see that it's threaded on one part, and then we have a smooth surface on the second part. This is also a good time to inspect the pins to make sure there's no wear on it. You shouldn't be able to feel anything with your fingernail when you run it across it. You also want to lube these two areas of the pins. Make sure you don't get any lubricant on the threads though. That's actually going to slide back and forth on the caliper as the disc pads wear. Okay, that's in place. All right, this side's all together. You know, keep in mind all the slide and contact points. Make sure you use the right type of lubricant and you lubricate them properly. That has to last the life of the disc pads. We've got this side all together. I'll go ahead and put the wheel and tire back on it, and then I'll go to the other side and put that together. Next thing we need to do is go ahead and let the van down off of the jack stands, and we want to torque our lug nuts. We want to torque the lug nuts because if they're over tightened, there's a good chance it could warp the brand new rotors we just installed. If they're not tight enough, then the wheel could come loose. So we'll let it down, torque our lug nuts, and then we'll be ready for the rear brakes. Okay, the rear caliper is a little bit different than the front caliper. As you can see where it's perched on top of the rotor. The retainer is still 2 bolts on the back side. We'll go ahead and take those loose, pop the caliper off, and we'll take a good look at everything. I want to let that soak for just a minute. I'll tell you what we've got here. The rear brakes on this are kind of unique compared to the front. We're only looking at 1/2 of the brake system because the rear brakes also have the parking brake assembly. We can't even see the parking brake assembly because it's inside of the rotor. This is getting to be more and more of a common parking brake design. When I take the rotor off, I'll be able to look at that. I'm going to look at that first and then make an overall decision of what I need to do with this wheel. Okay, there's our parking brake assembly. If you look at the rotor, we have the front and back side of the rotor where the disc pads are going to stop the vehicle with the regular brakes. But inside this rotor, we actually have a miniature drum brake right here. That's our parking brake assembly. Whenever you're inspecting this type of brake, you want to inspect the rotor, both surfaces here and also the surface inside of the drum. And when you're inspecting your disc pads, you want to look at your disc pads, but also you want to look at your emergency brake shoes. Now the nice thing about this is this is a total mechanical style brake system, so in the event that your hydraulic system would fail, you can push the emergency brake or parking brake, and it'll go ahead and apply the brakes in the back so you'll still have a braking system. What we want to do now, this has a lot of brake dust on it. You never want to use air, compressed air, to blow the dust off there. So we're going to take brake cleaner and spray everything down, and then we'll take a good look at everything. Well, I'd say we probably have about 3/4 of our disc pad left, so in reality we could go ahead and not do the rear brakes, but I want to go through the procedure and show you how to do this. Also, on our parking brake, it looks like this has hardly ever been used because I'd say that's close to the original thickness of the shoes. Now, one thing you want to do, this is cable operated, so occasionally you should apply your parking brake, especially like on an automatic transmission vehicle where you may not want to use the parking brake. If you're on a steep incline, you'd want to use it to keep the load off of the transmission. So I say occasionally go ahead and use your parking brake and allow everything to work on this. If you don't, when you do need to use it, it might stick. Everything there looks fine. I think we'll go ahead and replace the disc pads. We're going ahead and replace the rotors. Our front rotors were grooved a lot worse than our back ones, but you can see we do have a couple of deep grooves in the rotors. So we'll put new disc pads on it and rear rotors, and we should be in good shape. Well, the next step is just like the front, we need to push the piston back in and put our new pads in place. Be aware though, there's a second type of caliper that you actually screw the piston back in. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You also want to make sure that you lube the contact and slide points, which would be both sides of the caliper bracket. So you want to lubricate those real well. The shipping film that's on the rotor, make sure when you take that film off, you not only take it off the disc side, but also the drum side as well. Well, I have this side all ready to be put back together, but before I do, though, I want to go ahead and take the other side apart, inspect the caliper, and make sure the caliper over there is in good condition, because if it isn't, I have to replace them as a pair. Let's go ahead and check that next. Well, the caliper on this side is in good shape as well, so what we need to do is replace the disc pads, put the new rotors on, and we'll be like new again. On the front disc pads, we had the wear sensor built on the pads. We don't have that on the rear, but there is a difference between the left and right disc pad on the outboard pad. You want to make sure you get the correct pad on the correct side. Well, we have this brake all together. Next, I want to go and put the tire and wheel back on, take it down off of the jack stand. We're just about done. Well, we have all four of the brakes installed. The next step, we want to go ahead and pump the brake pedal several times. What that'll do is that'll bring the pistons back out of the caliper bores. When we get done with that, we want to go underneath the hood and double check our brake fluid level. We're ready to fill up our master cylinder. A couple things to keep in mind. Well, one is, on our vehicle, the reservoir for the master cylinder is really underneath the cowl, so you're going to need a funnel in order to reach the fluid to it. The second thing is, you want to wipe off around the cap area before you take the cap off, or debris will fall into the master cylinder. The third is, you want to make sure you use brake fluid out of a closed container. If not, it's going to be contaminated. Let's go ahead and fill it up. Well, we have the brakes on all four wheels. We've topped off the master cylinder, but the brake job's not complete yet. The last step, we want to take it for a test drive to make sure the brakes work properly. This is a disc brake system. The drum brake's a little bit different. Let's take a look at it. Like the disc brake, the drum brake has two brake shoes and a piston. But the drum brake also has an adjuster mechanism, an emergency brake mechanism, and several springs. When the brake pedal is depressed, the piston pushes the brake shoes against the drum. Because the wedging action creates extra braking force, drum brakes can use a smaller piston than disc brakes need. However, the same wedging action means that the shoes must be pulled away from the drum whenever the brakes are released. Some of the springs are used to return the shoes to their neutral position, while others help hold the brake shoes in place and return the adjuster arm after it actuates. This is an example of the rear drum brake system. On this vehicle, there's not a lot of miles on the truck, so chances are the brakes are going to be like new. What I want to do first is go ahead and remove the drum. Now on your vehicle, this procedure may be a little bit different. You want to consult your manual to see how the drum comes off. On our truck here, what we need to do is remove both of the clips. Now the reason the clips are on here is during the assembly process of the truck, it stops the drum from coming off the truck. So I want to go ahead and just remove the clips. We're not even going to reuse them. And also on this one, it has two puller holes made into the drum. It's two threaded holes. You just take two bolts, put them in there, tighten the bolts up, and as you tighten them, the drum will come off. Let's go ahead and remove the drum. When you tighten the bolts to remove the drum, you just want to alternate from one bolt to the next so you don't take a chance of warping the drum. There we are. Now we can go ahead and pull the drum off. This is our drum brake assembly on this vehicle, and if you look at this, compared to our disc brake system, we have two brake shoes. You can see them on both sides here. Now something else too, a lot of vehicles will have what's called a primary shoe. It will be a shorter lining material that will be on the front and have a secondary shoe on the rear. On our vehicle, they're both the same size. Something else too, we have a lot of brake dust here. This would be a good time, if you're going to service the brakes, to go ahead and put a dust mask on to protect yourself from that. If you look at this, our brakes are like new. This does, like I said, doesn't have a lot of miles on it. There is a unique procedure for taking any drum brake apart. And a good rule of thumb is only do one side at a time. That way you can use the other side as a guide. The exception to that would be is if the brakes were installed incorrectly, and then you'd want to refer back to your repair manual. But if you were able to get a lot of miles out of your brake system, chances are they're on correct. So do one side at a time, so that way if you lose track of where you're at, you can go over and refer to the other side. Now if you look at this, the hold down on our truck, it's like one long continuous spring. That's actually what's holding the brake shoes in place. You'd want to remove the spring. Also, we have a self-adjuster assembly right in here. As you drive the vehicle, the brakes will automatically adjust. And when you service the brakes, this is also something you want to take a look at to make sure the self-adjuster rotates freely. And also, that'd be another place that you would grease. In order to replace these brakes, we would remove the spring, our brake shoes would come off, and we would go ahead and remove our self-adjuster. And also, the parking brake is part of this assembly. We have a parking brake lever in here. The wheel cylinder is going to be the hydraulic portion of the brake that's connected to our brake pedal. But in case of a hydraulic failure, the parking brake's mechanical. As you depress the parking brake pedal, the shoes will expand and come out and touch the drum. That'll help stop the vehicle. Also, for parking the vehicle, if you have a manual transmission vehicle or if you have it on a steep incline, the same as on our disc brakes, this would apply the parking brake. Now, some of the tools that you'll need to do a job like this, there's various spring pliers such as these, and then we also have a brake spoon or an adjusting tool to adjust the rear brakes. It just depends on your application, and if you're not sure, you can check with the professionals at AutoZone. They can tell you what tools you'll need. Whenever you're inspecting the rear brakes, you want to check the condition of the lining on the brake shoes. You're looking for any kind of cracks. If this would be a riveted style shoe, this is a bonded shoe, but on a riveted style shoe, you'd see rivets throughout the shoe area. You want to make sure that the rivets aren't metal to the brake drum. So you want to check the overall condition, also the thickness. This is about the original thickness of these brake shoes on your vehicle. They might even be twice as thick as these. You just want to check the overall condition. You also want to check around the wheel cylinder to make sure you don't have any brake fluid leakage. If you do, then the wheel cylinder is going to have to be serviced or replaced. One last thing you want to check for while you're in here is check to see if there's any obvious grease. This being a rear-wheel drive vehicle, there's a grease seal for the axle. If that seal would fail, grease would cover the brake system. So not only would you have to replace the brakes, you'd want to replace that seal or you have a repeat problem. We want to also inspect the drum. What you want to look for are any cracks in the drum surface, and also if there's any hot spots, it'll be like a bluish spot. There might be grooves in it. If any of those conditions exist, you'll either have to replace the drum or have it serviced. Ours is in good shape. There's different designs for different vehicles. Just refer to your repair manual, but just take your time. With the right tools and the right parts, they're not that complicated. Let's go ahead and put the drum back on. Well, our brakes work great. They're stopping the car straight and true with no noises or vibration, and the pedal is firm. We have covered a lot of information today, and I hope I have helped you learn how to perform these basic maintenance and repair tasks for yourself. And remember, the folks down at AutoZone are a great resource for helping you complete these tasks the right way. They can give you trustworthy advice and help you get the right parts, products, and tools you need to do the job right. Thanks for watching. I'm Bruce Bonebrake.
Get in the zone, AutoZone.
I want to talk briefly about bleeding the brakes. Let's say we have to replace the brake caliper or one of the hoses, really any part of the hydraulic system. You're going to need to get the air out of the system. That's bleeding the brakes. How to do that is real simple. We have what's called a one-man brake bleeder right here. This is a real unique little device. It only takes one person to bleed the brakes. How this works is real simple. We just loosen up the bleeder screw. I'll attach the hose to the bleeder. I'll go back inside the van and I'll pump the brakes. I want to keep pumping the brakes until all the air is out of the system. Let's go ahead and bleed the brakes. Now that the hose is installed, I'll go back inside the van and pump the brakes. You'll see the fluid go through the hose into the capture bottle. Now, if you look at our hose, you'll see that we have straight fluid. There's no evidence of air bubbles. So we need to tighten the bleeder, remove our bleeding kit, and then you can just go on and do the same process to all the rest of the wheels. Another brake component that can fail is the master cylinder, and I want to go over the procedure, how to bleed the master cylinder, because this needs to be bled off of the vehicle. When you buy the replacement master cylinder, here's basically what you're going to get. The master cylinder itself, we have the cap that goes over the top, and you're also going to get a bleeder kit, and this is going to be real helpful when it comes to bleeding the master cylinder. What you'll get, like this for example, has 2 adapters, and we have the dual hoses. Now the way this works is real simple. We take the adapters, and as you can see, we have 2 different sizes because we have 2 different size ports on this master cylinder. So we want to locate the correct one for the correct port. We take our caps off. This adapter fits our rear port, and this adapter is going to fit our front port. You want to screw them in there hand tight. Then we have both of the hoses. Attach the hose to the adapter. You want to push it up over the barb. And then we have a retaining clip that actually will hold the hoses in place while we're doing the bleeding procedure. Put the clip over the reservoir. Snap our hoses into the clip. Now the next step is to go ahead and fill the master cylinder with fluid. We want to fill it about halfway full. You want to get it just so the hoses are touching the fluid. You want to make sure you use brake fluid that came from a closed container so there's no chance of any contamination. Now that we have fluid in there, the next step is we want to gently take a Phillips screwdriver. Works real well for this procedure. Where the plunger would go for the brake pedal, we want to just depress the plunger. Okay, at this point I want to add some more fluid to our reservoir. We've already added fluid into the bore of the cylinder, so our fluid level's dropped. You want to make sure you maintain the fluid level so the hoses are in the fluid. Now back to our procedure. As we're developing pressure, we've got a leak on our front port. This is the time to go ahead and tighten up both of the fittings. Because if it's leaking fluid out, it's going to be able to pull air in. Okay. Okay, as I depress the plunger now, you'll see that we have just straight fluid going back into the reservoir. So at this point, the master cylinder is completely bled. Now the last step, we want to go ahead and remove our hoses. And this bleeder kit even came with caps that we can put over both of the adapters. That way we can transfer the master cylinder from this location to our vehicle without losing fluid. Fill up our master cylinder. We have the cap installed, and at this point, the master cylinder is ready to be put onto the vehicle. We mentioned the second style rear caliper used on vehicles, and unlike our Caravan, where it had the separate parking brake, this is all combined into one unit. How this works is real simple. We still have the conventional caliper with a piston that pushes out against the pads, but on the back side of this, we have a cable that comes here and operates this lever, and as this lever is depressed, the piston will come out and apply the brakes. Now there is a trick to this though when you're servicing this type of caliper. Instead of just pushing the piston directly in, it has to rotate as it goes into the bore, and then that way you have the room to put your new disc pads in here. That's where a toolkit like this comes in handy. This is available in AutoZone's Loan-A-Tool program. It has the different adapters for the different calipers, and as you can see, like the pin configuration is going to be a lot different from one caliper to the next. What we need to do is locate which adapter we need to use on our caliper. Once we do that, I'll show you how this works. Like for example, this one here is going to be too small. What we're looking for are the two pins on the adapter have to fit the notches on the caliper piston. For example, as you can see, this one's going to be the wrong size, it's going to be too small. That one's going to be an exact fit. That's what we're looking for. It should mount flush to this. With the adapter, we use the tool. And if you look at the tool, this adapter will fit into the tool. It even has a magnet to hold it in place. Then we have a plate that goes over the end. And we retract it. Put it in place in our caliper. Okay, we have it properly positioned right now. Now how this works is I rotate this, it's going to rotate the piston and at the same time press it back into its bore. And there we have it. Once it's fully retracted, we release our tool. And it's ready to be installed.